Evening. It's a real pleasure to welcome you all to this uh, program today, the First Bank of Alabama Lecture Series. This is a wonderful thing that they do, sponsor these for us. So if you've got money you want to put in a good bank, you can see those people, they'll take it. Do not give it to Chris. He will not get it to them. So if you'll just want Today, we are going to have one of the most exciting programs we've had here in years. Katie Lamar Jackson is going to be telling a story about an Army Sergeant First Class, Benny Adkins, who was awarded the highest military honor award in 2014. He lived in Opelika, Alabama until his death in 2020. She spent time with him getting the story of what happened in the jungles of Vietnam when he and 16 fellow Green Berets and 200 trainees were attacked by 2 battalions of North Vietnamese soldiers. She'll tell the story about how he was wounded, the effort to defend the inhabitants that he had, and it was just a marvelous story, almost lost. And thank you, Katie, for working with Benny to capture this story and to tell about it. And the title of it, The Tiger Among Us, a story of bravery in the battle of life. Katie is a writer, a photographer. She sings, she dances, she does all sorts of exciting things. But what she does best is entertain. And I think we're just lucky to have her. And we had a picture of a thing from the Auburn magazine where the Sundilla program on acoustic guitars has been going for 25 years, and she and her sister and her compatriots are all working on that. So don't think that we just get somebody can knows how to speak. She's a writer, she's an author, over 20 books, or a co-author. And Katie, we're just thrilled to have you with us, and we'll turn it over to you. And if you don't do a good job, we will pay you just the same, so don't worry about it.
Thank you.
Real good.
Needless to say, I sound better than I am, thanks to this man. So anyway, it's such a pleasure to be here to this group. I've heard about this gathering through other author friends and historians for years, and through my sister, Lamar, who has worked closely with Shirley and Ted and the whole crowd here through the years. So it's like, this is a huge honor to get to be here and be with you all and be in this town and with a crowd that shows up and listens and is interested. So thank you for all being here. I should point out, and I hope that she doesn't get mad at me for this, but Benny Adkins' daughter is with us today too. Mary Ann Blake sitting back here. So when it comes to Q&A, then we might be calling on her to answer some of these questions. Mary Ann and I traveled together when I was working on the book, and we had a really good time. We had some fun travels to go and interview some of the other survivors from the battle, and so I feel like she's my sister. She might not feel the same way too, but anyway, we've spent a lot of hours together, and I deeply appreciate you and your family and this opportunity that I had. So a little backstory. They say that everything you know you learned in kindergarten. Well, that also goes with every opportunity that you have may start in kindergarten. So the reason that I have been lucky enough to be able to work on this book is that a young man at the time that I was in kindergarten with, that I went all the way through high school with, and whose wife and I worked together at Auburn years ago, came to me and said, he and Benny were really close friends, and he said, after Benny had received the medal, he said, Benny would need somebody to help him write this book, and we wondered if you'd be interested. And I said, of course I'd be interested in helping with that. And so Benny and his wife Mary and Johnny and I, the friend from kindergarten, met at the Starbucks in Tigertown and had a coffee together and talked about it. And Benny's wife Mary decided that I was okay. And so I have had this incredible opportunity to be able to work with him on this book. So I'm going to walk you through a little bit about Benny himself, a lot about Benny himself, and then how the book came about a little bit as well. But to me, Benny's story is one of incredible bravery and incredible resilience and things like that. But it's also that his story is he deserves a medal for many things. So we'll talk about that a little bit as we go along. So this is Benny Adkins in his right after he received the medal. He was born on a dark and stormy night. Actually, I don't know whether it's a dark and stormy night, but he was born in Oklahoma to a farm family. This is baby Benny right here. So he was one of 7 children. He was the middle, so he was right in the middle. He's number 4 in the middle of 7 children growing up on this farm in Oklahoma. And he always admitted that he didn't hate farm life, but farm life wasn't necessarily what he wanted to do. He goes off to college, and I will tell you, Benny was hilarious. He was a great storyteller. Talked about the fact that college was okay, but the girls were even better that he saw in college. And his grades might not have been quite what they needed to be, so time came and he did not stay in college, and then he was drafted. And so he was drafted into the Army. Went off to basic training. Part of his time was spent in Fort Benning, Georgia, so nearby. But he was also always a family man. So he and his brothers and sisters, his mom, his aunts and uncles, he was constantly connected back to Oklahoma. But he shows up in Georgia, and this is a young version of Benny here. He's there at Fort Benning, and he runs into this rather beautiful woman from Opelika, and they make a connection, to say the least. So they end up getting married. This is his wife, Mary, and she's gorgeous. She was gorgeous till her whole life. So just a really beautiful woman, inside and out. Got married and set off and started a family together. So they ended up moving around for various positions while he was in the military. He was doing a career. While he was in the military, when he first got to Fort Benning, he kind of got bored pretty easily with just the basic stuff. And so he decided he wanted a little more excitement. So he works his way up. He starts working toward getting into Special Forces, which is quite a feat. There's a whole lot of things you have to learn to do, and a lot of things that you have to be able to accomplish, like jumping out of airplanes, things like that required a little more risk than what he might have been doing just for basic training. So he ends up working his way up and into the Special Forces, and they move around a good bit. So in the 1960s, he is, I'm skipping a lot here, obviously. There's so much more to his story than that, but the minute I start trying to give you dates and exact times, then I will not get them entirely right. So that's what books are for. That's what, we can fill you in on those later too. So anyway, one of the things he did do while he was working his way up through the ranks was he was in Germany and ended up where he was working as a clerk typist. And he actually had spent some time with Elvis while he was there. So he had quite an interesting progression through the ranks as well. But anyway, he ends up, during the startup of the Vietnam War, being deployed 3 times to Vietnam. The first time he was there, and it was an adventure. The second time he went, he ended up in being assigned, and by this time he was in Special Forces, he ended up being assigned to a training camp that was located way, way, way out in the jungles of South Vietnam, but right along the Ho Chi Minh Trail. So a very isolated camp, a very small camp. In the meantime, Mary, and I forget how many children there were at the time, but she was back home with babies. There were 4 at the time. 4, thank you. See, this is another of the Adkins family here with us. So we've got all kinds of good sources here. So he ends up being deployed, and it's sent to this training camp called Camp Ashow. Now, if that's the way we pronounce it, I'm not sure exactly if in Vietnam it might be a slightly different pronunciation, but that's how we've always pronounced it. And he's there with he is one of 17 Special Forces soldiers who are sent to this camp to do training and reconnaissance. And so he gets out there, and almost immediately he and all of the other special forces people who are there realize that they're not in the best situation. They're very isolated, they're very undermanned, they are surrounded by jungle, and right there on the Ho Chi Minh Trail, lots of activity going on. The whole time they were there, they were getting sort of sniped at and things like that, even before things became a battle. So they knew that they were in a bad situation, but they were not very well supported either from home base. So they were kind of out there on their own. And one night, they've already gotten some intel from someone, soldier, Viet Cong, I believe, who they had captured, North Vietnamese soldier they had captured, who said, yeah, sure enough, there's going to be an assault on this camp. And so they already knew that something was up and that they were going to be under attack, but they didn't have any idea, I don't think at the time, just what that attack would actually mean. And they were trying to prepare, but again, with 17 Special Forces officers and about 200 trainees were in the camp who were either indigenous troops or a few other South Vietnamese troops, but just not a lot of well-trained staff there, not a lot of supplies, just kind of out there on their own and trying to learn as they go. So this is what the camp looked like before the battle. So a little triangular camp. It's hard to tell in this picture, but all of what looks brown and gray is jungle around them. And they're pretty wide open there. So they've got this little camp with mortar bases in it, and it's set up to be a camp, but not exactly well fortified, kind of tin and stuff like that. Nothing really to hold anybody back. But this is what it looked like before the battle. So on the early morning of March the 8th, the mortars start flying overhead. And so they're exploding overhead, the attack is on. Up until then, they could hear voices even outside the perimeter of the camp as the enemy was digging in. And they could tell that there were a lot of them. So it turns out that the group that was attacking them was a battalion, which is, it was 10 times the number of people in the enemy camp that were going to come toward them compared to theirs. So they were way, way, way outnumbered and armed and all kinds of things. So after that, those first mortars went off, it turned into basically 38 hours of intense combat. There were some lulls here and there, but basically they were being fired upon. There were many moments when there was hand-to-hand combat, and Benny and his fellow soldiers, as well as the indigenous soldiers, were fighting back, but it was very obvious that they couldn't really hold them back. And yet they were going to keep fighting until they were told not to. So in the process, a number of the Special Forces soldiers were wounded or killed, and some of them wounded, still alive, but wounded pretty severely, so that it was fewer and fewer of them to even fight the battle. Benny ended up, so one of the things he did in high school, I think it was high school, not college. Am I right that he played baseball? Yeah. So he was a pretty good pitcher, I believe. Catcher, sorry. Thank you. Obviously, I'm not a Braves fan, or I don't know all my positions, but anyway, Benny, oh my gosh. Oh, yeah. So he was a pretty good catcher in high school, and turns out those are some other skills that work really well as you get older, because he was in a mortar pit and a live grenade falls into the pit, and he picks it up. I don't think he catches it. Maybe he did catch it, but he picks it up and he tosses it back out and is able to save himself and whoever else is in the pit with him from that grenade. And so he just keeps fighting. He ends up, because they've lost so many other people to help, he ends up standing in the mortar pit and trying to fire their own guns back and does all this hand-to-hand combat. It's just super intense. I mean, and I will tell you that when I got to do this book with Benny and when it first came out, to have Benny to give this address was a remarkable experience, because he was not a man who wanted to give you gory details, but he could really instill in you just how ferocious and how outmanned they were and how intense the operation was. But so for 38 hours they fight, and they have all of these other problems going on. One is that some of the troops within their camp turned against them because they realized that they could go over to the other side and they might live to do that. So they didn't, and they weren't necessarily in it as committed as they might have been. And then they did try to evacuate some. They finally got the word to it's time to evacuate, and the Army sends in planes and helicopters to get them out. And then at that point, a lot of the indigenous soldiers rushed the planes trying to get out. So not all of the U.S. forces were able to even get on there. They were overloaded. It was just a total mess. So that kind of delayed, needless to say, getting people out of there. So toward the end of that, Benny and I think it was 3 other of the soldiers that he left with. I'm trying to remember who was with him. Anyways, he and some of the surviving soldiers, including one who was incredibly severely injured, beyond being able, he was on a stretcher. So toward the very end, they were able to actually try and make a run for it into the jungle. So he and this small group, I think there were 5 of them in the group, including this wounded soldier, and they get out into the jungle with him and were able to make it out through the fire into the jungle. But at that point, the Special Forces soldier had passed away, so they stowed his body somewhere, hoping to be able to come back after it. And then they continued to take off into the jungle. In the jungle, they ran through all kinds of jungle, for one thing, but they're followed the whole time by the enemy, who are hot on their trails. So they're continually trying to evade. Benny ends up, he was very inventive. He had a sawed-off shotgun that he turned into an antenna by standing in the water, because their radio was messed up, so he could still communicate with people who might be able to come fix him. So talk about a guy who could make things happen out of nothing. He was pretty amazing. So they, at some point, so for 48 hours, he ended up being in the jungle trying to evade the enemy. And while they were there, at some point, they've hunkered down in an area where they feel like they're safe, and they can hear the enemy all around them talking. But then they start to hear another noise around them. And so at that time, when there were a lot of tigers in Vietnam, and these tigers had figured out that war was to their advantage, because they had sort of, lots of bodies and wounded people that they could feed on. So they had learned to become they were drawn to the smell of blood and to things like that. And as Benny said, he was pretty sure that, they heard the noise, and then he saw this flash of eyes in the dark and realized that it was a tiger that was stalking them. It was all around him, stalking them. And he said, no doubt, they were all covered in blood and, wounded and that kind of thing. So they probably smelled pretty tasty. And so he ended up, they were just expecting the worst. And then suddenly they realized that the enemy had scattered. So the enemy also knew what the tigers could be like, and they ran. And that gave Benny and his group a chance to make a run for it again. So the tiger didn't actually attack them. It saved their lives. Kind of an amazing story, which Benny used to play down. We'd have these discussions. I'd say, that tiger story is so great. Oh, it's just but so luckily we were able to convince him that he and the tiger had a lot in common. Came in handy for naming this book. But anyway, these tigers were huge, and needless to say, as you can tell, they have some teeth on them. So it would be somebody you didn't want to run into in the dark, and especially if you look like you tasted good. So they eventually are picked up and with a helicopter swooped in, and were able to be taken to help, gotten out of there. And so Benny ends up on a medical ship with, I think it was 18 wounds at least. A lot of it shrapnel wounds, but he was, and a little bit in an eye. That shrapnel he continued to deal with for the rest of his life, I think. They couldn't get it all out, so it would pop out occasionally at strange times, because as it worked its way out of his body. But this is what the camp looked like after the battle. So when about a month later, I believe, they were, not Benny, but one of the other soldiers who had been there at the battle was able to go back in and try to get bodies, and to do the follow-up. And so it was just a, like a bomb escape there. So hardly anything left of the buildings. They were able to get all the bodies except for the one soldier that they were unable to get out of the jungle, and that soldier, they never were able to find his body, which has been something that haunted Benny and I think everybody who was involved for the rest of Benny's life. And that's because at that point they probably couldn't GPS things. You couldn't do that sort of thing so easily. So that body's never been recovered, and that's a terrible thing. So of the 17 soldiers who were there, by the time we were working on the book, there were, is it 6? Again, these numbers are terrible with me. John, anyway, not all of the others, almost all of them made it out except for 3. But then over the years, they had passed on too. So by the time we did the book, that they were not all surviving, but we were able to interview those who did. So they get out of this. So he gets back, and he and his group are immediately given all kinds of honors. The Bronze Stars, Distinguished Service, Silver Star, Purple Hearts, that sort of thing. And at that point, he was nominated as a candidate for the Medal of Honor because of his, not single-handed, and he would tell you that, but the amount of bravery and the resilience and the ferocity that he fought with there and saved a lot of lives. He was able to, he qualified for it. But, as in so many things, there were other people up for the honor, and there might have been a little politics because those Special Forces guys seem to often be chosen for, they were in situations where they ended up being in dire situations that qualified for the medal. But anyway, he was passed over for that right after that. So he was actually, this is when he was recommended. And at that point, he and Mary and the family were not living in Opelika, but he considered Opelika home. We're claiming him, right? We're claiming Opelika as home. So this was when he was first nominated or recommended for the medal. But it was 48 years later before he actually received the medal. So over those years, after the war, he stayed in the service for a number of years, went back to Vietnam for a 3rd time, had a rather exciting career. Sometimes I'd say, well, so what else did you say? Well, I can't tell you. I'd have to kill you. I'm sworn to, So he had a very interesting life. Many of those stories, I wish that I at least had heard some of them, and he wouldn't tell all of them. But he was also very dedicated to his pledge to not tell things that he was not supposed to tell. But anyway, his final tour in Vietnam was in 1971, and then after that, he went to Fort. I'm not sure I can pronounce it. To a fort in Arizona. He ended up. Thank you. Yes. Yes. Okay. Yeah. So he was there, and it was while he was there that he joined the what's it called? Army Sergeant's Major Academy, and went on to El Paso, Texas, and ended up being a command, getting the title of Command Sergeant Major, which for an enlisted man is as high as you can go in that area. So he stayed in the service until then. He finally retired from the Army in 1978. And, he had discovered as soon as he came home from Vietnam that Vietnam veterans were not beloved in this country. They were not treated well. He was certainly one, people didn't want to hire him. They didn't want to, because there was such a negative attitude toward those veterans. So he figured out it was time for him to take another path. So he goes back to school, and he earns a bachelor's degree in 1979 and a master in accounting or business, I believe, and then went on to get a master's degree in education, and then a second master's degree in management. All of those from Troy University, and then at the same time he was also starting his own business. So he started an accounting firm, Adkins Accounting Service in Auburn, Alabama. And for 22 years, he was the local accountant that everybody loved and adored. Most people had no clue that he had been in the Special Forces, in the Army. They knew him as this wonderful man in the community, a pillar of the community, but not anything really about his background. And he also, during that time, was teaching night classes at Southern Union, which he did for 10 years. and at Auburn University, taught night classes too for 6 years. And then he also worked with like prisoners at the county jail for literacy projects and things like that. So he realized, even though he'd had a really good time in college the first time, he was a really serious student those second times. And so he understood the value of education by that time, and really understood that had helped him create an entire new life beyond the military. So he was a firm believer in education for himself and for families and for anybody else in the world, and tried to help people along. So all this time, his opportunity or his recommendation for Medal of Honor had occasionally come up again. People would suggest it again, and it hadn't happened. But one of the problems with that is that at the time, for the longest time, there was a time limit on how long ago the action had occurred and whether you could qualify, so it had to happen in a certain time frame. But they were able to change that, Congress changed that, and was so that it was open then to people, as far back as forever, so it was no longer a time limit on it. So I think that Benny was aware that there had been a fresh start trying to get his name out there again, but he's at home one day and he gets a phone call and said, I can't remember if he was already on the line or if he had to call back. He said, be prepared to talk to the president. So he gets a phone call from President Obama and said, I'm just calling to let you know that you have been chosen or selected for the Medal of Honor. So and that was 48 years after the actual battle itself. So it took that long. And that was when the community who didn't already know it in our community was like, oh my gosh, this is the accountant, Benny Adkin. I mean, people just were not necessarily floored, but I think there are a lot of people surprised that this man who didn't come across at all as a Green Beret was also their accountant. So he actually is given the medal on September 14th, 2014. This is him at that ceremony. This is him with Chuck Hagel, who was the Secretary of Defense and also wrote the foreword for the book for us. And this is Benny and Mary as they're leaving thing. I love this picture because he looks kind of happy, doesn't he? I mean, it's just what a great, yeah. So he comes home from that, and everybody knows about it, and that's how it was 2015, I believe, when we actually started working on the book. And Benny I will be honest, I was not their first choice, which is okay. He had checked with several other authors who had worked with, like Hal Moore and some of the other people who've had famous books out, but they were busy. And Benny said, I'd like to have this book done while I'm on this side of the earth, kind of things. So we started working on it. He and I spent over a year interviewing, and I would go to his house and we'd sit and talk for a few hours. Then I'd leave, and then I'd come back a few days later or later that week, and we worked on the story. Now, he was not, he never bragged about anything. And sometimes getting stories out of him was a little bit of a problem because he didn't want to go into any detail. He didn't want to say things he shouldn't say. He didn't want this to be like, let me tell you all those terrible things that happened. But over time, we gradually were able to get it down. And I do have all those recordings, Mary, so remind me, and we need to find a way to get Mary Ann, so that we can get those to you. But anyway, it was just an amazing experience. And I was, a child of the 60s, so I was certainly aware of the Vietnam War and, was not oblivious about it. But I had no idea, really, all of the things that were going on until I started interviewing Benny. And one of the joys of being a writer is that you are constantly getting to learn something new and broaden your own horizons and knowledge base. So it was such a gift to me as well to be able to put things in perspective, and especially from someone who had lived it and not just knew about it. As I talk about a living historian. So we started working on the book. We also were able to interview, and again, math is terrible, so 5 or 6 of the other surviving Special Forces guys, and they were also amazing because Benny was determined that this book was not his book, it was their book, and he wanted as many voices as we could possibly have in it. And so we were able to go around and hear their sides of the story, which everybody was. I mean, there were not 2 sides to that story. It was just getting it from their perspective. So we were able to pull the book together and have all these voices in there, and then get it published in 2018, I think 20. Yeah, so it took a while before the book actually came out, but that's how books work. They don't come out overnight, and maybe more so now than they used to. There were a lot of book signings, which were wonderful, and honestly, Benny was. I mean, if I went to book signings, he could tell these stories. We were able to do a presentation in Washington, D.C. at the National Archives, and I got to interview him on stage, but all I had to do was say, now tell me about this, and he could take off with these amazing stories. So it was a fabulous experience to not only write this book with him, but then see him in action afterwards. That is a close-up of the medal itself, which is very, very beautiful, and Benny wore it when he would go out, but he wasn't like wearing it to brag, and he didn't wear it everywhere, but I remember so many times being with him, and if he had the medal on, there were people who would just stop, and they recognized it. You know, they realized who he was, and it was just really, it gives me the chills to this day to remember, to see the reverence that he received, that he deserved too, when he would wear that. But he always said, I do not wear this for myself. I wear this for the 16 other soldiers who fought and who died, and those who died in the battle, and those who even made it out. The thing about Benny is that he was a man of commitment, and he was committed to a lot of things. So his commitment to his job and to, you know, as a soldier was obvious and profound. But he was also committed to family. So he was a family man. He had, you know, he was involved with his children, his grandchildren. He and his wife Mary, who he adored, and they took such good care of one another. He was also very committed to fun. He had a great sense of humor, and he was not afraid to wear wigs for Halloween and sombreros at birthday parties, and he didn't mind getting in cars and doing parades and things like that. So he had such a great sense of humor and such a great willingness to just be a normal person. You know, this is just a fabulous guy. He also was very committed to veterans, as a veteran himself who had experienced lots of challenges coming out of the service. He wanted to be able to support other veterans as much as he could. And one of the ways he did that was he founded the Benny Adkins. He and his family put together the Benny Adkins Foundation, which was a foundation that set out to provide scholarships to soldiers who were about to leave the service and wanted to go on to college, Special Forces soldiers, so specifically for Special Forces soldiers. And so he established that. He's also been since honored, unfortunately posthumously, with the Benny Adkins Veterans State Home in Enterprise, Alabama. I have not been to it. It looks like an amazing facility, and I know Mary Ann and the family have seen it. An amazing facility there in Enterprise that's serving veterans of all wars, you know, and for a variety of needs. So he's certainly been able to, his legacy continues on today, but he felt very deeply committed to being able to make sure that veterans got the support and the credit that they needed beyond service. Again, the education, he was committed to education, so he had established this scholarship, which is now under the Green Beret Foundation. So they're actually administering it, which makes perfect sense. They are the ones who also know candidates and get the word out there to these candidates. And it's changed the lives of a number of soldiers already who've been benefited from it. He also received an honorary doctorate from Troy. This is Dr. Benny Adkins up here. He was very committed to community too. He was constantly, you know, doing things, but always willing to go, you know, to show up and help with things, to get behind things within the community, and again, be a grand marshal in a parade. This is Johnny, who is the man who actually connected the two of us, driving him in Johnny's Jeep at I think that was Opelika Christmas parade, something like that. And on April 17th, 2020, so Mary had passed away 2 years before that, is that right? Or a year? 19 what? 2019, so the year before Mary had passed away. And Benny had actually gone to visit family in Oklahoma and ended up coming home with COVID. And so he unfortunately passed away. It's for somebody who was able to fight off tigers and the enemy. There's just some things he couldn't fight off. But boy, he fought hard even then to try and get through that. He and Mary both are buried in Arlington. So this is images from his service. And you can see masked up, so this is in the midst of COVID. So their graves are there in Arlington. And I feel like that his legacy and Mary's legacy are both enduring. I mean, they're enduring for what he did in the military, and enduring for what she did, taking care of the home front. Her story is in this book about when she realized she did know through news that this camp had been overrun, and they didn't know whether she thought he wasn't sure if the story was that nobody was going to make it out alive, but she down deep knew he was going to come home. So there's a great story about what she went through during that period when she was getting the messages about him missing in action. This is the two of them together again. What an amazing, yeah. So anyway, it was such an honor again to be able to tell their story and to work with Benny and the other Special Forces soldiers and with Mary and then hang out with Mary Ann and the family. So it's just been a fabulous experience for me. But also, it's a great story that continues. And the book is not. I don't have books to sell, so I'm not here. But if you're interested in the book, you can get them all the usual suspect ways, Amazon and that sort of thing. You can also, and this is the writer in me that's always like, if you really want to help the writing world, you can order it directly from the press, Da Capo Press. If you want an audiobook, Libro FM, and then I think ebooks and print books through bookshop.org. And with those two organizations, you can click on that, and the money you spend goes back to bookstores, to independent bookstores. So, for instance, we have two great independent bookstores in Auburn, and so I try to buy all my books, or as many as possible, from these things if I'm going to order them, because they're just as fast, the price is usually as good, and you're going to benefit. You can pick a bookstore and send the money back to them. So you're supporting your own community and the book community as well. I think that's it. Do you have questions?
I don't have a question, but I don't know if you know it or not, but Siliconga got a Medal of Honor winner too from Vietnam.
Right.
His name's Michael Bravery.
And Mary Ann?
After my parents passed away, I found a family book. And Mike Sprayberry is related to my mother. Because I read about that and I'm
Wow.
like, is that the Mike? Yeah. So when we email each other, we're like, he's like, hey, cuz. I'm like, hi, cuz. Yeah, but we found out about that after my parents passed.
Wow.
Yeah.
Gosh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Yes.
didn't know I was going to be on loud.
I think Alabama has 5 total, but some of those are from way back too. So yeah, it's a pretty impressive thing. Yes.
I'm sorry. Okay, my brother-in-law was in Special Forces. He's dead now. But the thing was that they were in secrecy about all their trips. And this was a real problem for some people. And as you say, they never spoke about anything ever. But he retired, he went out as a captain. So he had many, many men who were under him. And these people had skills that you would never believe. They didn't just jump out of planes, they scuba dived. They did all sorts of things to live, to help people live. And it's amazing. It's just amazing is all I can say.
Yeah.
But the secrecy was what kept the stories away. And you are so fortunate that he was old enough that he could even talk to you about these things. My uncle also was they were attacked, and he's one of the only survivors out of the whole thing. And he's never spoken of any of this ever, and he's now in his 90s. And he was riddled really bad. He was just barely alive when they found him. But they passed over him several times before they picked him up because they wasn't sure anybody was alive. Oh. And so he spent months in the recovery of a ship while they tried to pick things out of him. It was especially across his chest. He has many, many scars. He's a very fine man, yeah. I would say. But the reason that they didn't finish killing him was because he was so bloody, the people who attacked them. And they thought, and there's something about the blood, that there's something about the blood. People that are really bloody, they don't mess with them. And the blood that he shed was what saved his life.
Wow.
And anyway, it's just, the fact that you were able to work with the family. And these stories, I know they came out little by little because the act of secrecy was the thing that held him back, okay? Mm-hmm. And I know that my brother-in-law was in on many, many things that he would never speak of when they went in to take care of a certain problem. And anyway, that's,
Right.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. And your point is so well taken that there are so many veteran stories out there and things that can't be told, but also it's hard. I remember years ago I was a newspaper reporter at the Gadsden Times, and it was Veterans Day. We ended up trying to do interviews with veterans of World War II, and there were these big steelworker guys, tough guys, and I would go in to talk to them about their experience, and they either couldn't talk about it, or when they did, they sobbed. Because even though we think of that as the good war, war is just hell. And so it's so important if people can talk about it, though, I think, for us to capture those stories. And I would encourage any of you who are veterans, whether you fought in a war in hand-to-hand combat or not, to get your stories down, and or if you have family members or friends who are, because we're going to lose those that can be told. And it is, as somebody whose father and mother had passed on, Jay and I often talk about, we forgot to ask them. We don't know those details. So, or your own stories, even if it's not about being a veteran. So I strongly encourage people to capture these stories while you can, if you can. Any other questions?
Do we have any more? I do want to make mention to Katie, thank you so much for the wonderful presentation and the recording of the story, because we say this all the time, that people have stories in their family that just nobody tells. They have documents, photographs, pieces of history that we need to be preserving. So thank you so much for doing that. And I do also want to say, I want to mention your sister Jay. Jay Lamar is here. And when Alabama had their bicentennial, Jay was over the state bicentennial project for the 3 years of the celebration. And Jay was the one that encouraged us here at the Comer Library to take part in that and to write a grant and for us to preserve local people's history. And so through Jay's advocacy, the Comer Library was able to write a grant and get some videography equipment, some different things, so that we could record some stories. And we were just talking at lunch that some of those stories have come in handy as of late, because we have citizens in our town that we have on video that we were able to pull some video and give some things to people's families. And so it's so important. So thank you for that effort. And thank you to Jay, too, for being such a good friend to the library and for recording, and to Mr. Atkins' family, too, for being willing to share and for coming today, too. Do you have anything else?
No, just thank you all for being here, and thank you, Mary Ann, and the whole Atkins family for having this opportunity. And I feel very inadequate to tell Benny's story, to be honest, but it's an honor to be able to at least tell bits of it. And if you're interested in more, there's a lot online, and the book is, again, available. But there's so much more to discover. So please go, if you're interested. Please go look it up because I left out 95% of what really happened, to say the least.
And we do have a couple of copies of your book, and they've been on order, but they're coming in. So if you want to get on reserve for those, stop by the front desk and ask them to put you on reserve. Again, thank you to Miss Katie very much for being here today. I want to remind you next week, we're kind of at a turn just a little bit. We usually wrap up with Dolores Hydock, but she's coming next week instead of the last week. If you've seen her, you know you want to be here. So Dolores Hydock next week. Again, I always want to say thank you to First Bank of Alabama. And Mr. Chris, thank you. You're the best cookie boy around. Thank you to the Coosa Valley Medical Center for providing us with these great cookies, and to Dr. Shirley Spears with the Comer Library Foundation for helping make these things possible. Thank you so much for being here today, and we'll see you next week. Thanks.